And you don't have to take our word for it. You can believe US President Donald Trump, who's announced a barrage of tariffs, of course, in the last few months. So much so that tariffs have now become a defining feature of Trump 2.0. These tariffs now hang in the balance as the Supreme Court gears up to hear one of the most consequential cases in decades. Now, it doesn't happen often that the president of a country puts the spotlight on just how important a case is. And Trump has called this, and I quote here, a life or death situation for America's economic and national security as well. Trump has justified the bulk of his tariff announcements by pointing to the IEEPA, which gives the president the power to regulate imports in response to certain emergencies. Now, an important part of the US administration's economic policy agenda is something that is hanging in the balance at this point in time. And to take a closer look at the implications of this case, of course, we do have with us David Roche, strategist at Quantum Strategy, joining us this evening. In fact, I'll dive right into it, David, because the court has been reluctant to overrule presidential decisions of this magnitude. But in any case, you're looking at a very high stakes ruling, to say the very least, right? What kind of an impact are you penciling in at this point in time? And of course, a good evening at least for us here, it's a good evening. How are you looking at the kind of impact that is being penciled in?
Okay, let me put this in a framework. There are three possible outcomes. The first is the Supreme Court says the use of IEEPA, which can only be used if there's a threat to national security and the economy and the political well-being of the United States. If they rule that the tariffs are illegal and the use of this power does not justify the use of the tariffs, then that really brings tumbling down the whole of the Trump economic and international relations edifice. Because all the deals he has done, 70% of them rely on the IEEPA, and that would be invalidated. And of course, a lot of money, 200 billion, according to my estimates, coming into the United States are due to these tariffs, which covers the cost of the big, beautiful bill of the budget. So he's actually covered his own costs this way. So if that happens, that's really bad news, not possibly for the US economy, but certainly for Donald Trump. Now, the other option is they say it's all okay. And in this case, I don't think that's good for markets long-term either, because what will it do? It will make Trump feel justified and empowered in using tariffs for anything. Tariffs will be the hammer, and any political problem he meets domestically or abroad will be the nail. And I think the splurging of tariffs, which won't be just related to the economy, it could be related to the color of people's eyes, anything, that will be very disruptive to economy. So that's not good either, but it may take longer to take effect. And the third option is the Supreme Court fudges it and says, well, it's really rather naughty to use these tariffs. But you don't have to take them off, or you only have to take them off over 2 years, blah, blah, blah. And the markets would say, oof, sigh of relief, business as usual, which is bad enough. So that would be the three outcomes I would tell you about.
All right, then. So those are the three outcomes that you're thinking of. Keeping a tap on the knuckle aside, let's say that doesn't happen. In terms of a bigger sort of impact that this has, let's say the Supreme Court goes out and says that, okay, this is invalid right now. What are some of the key risks that you're thinking of at this point in time from a market perspective? Because you're talking some big numbers, right? And I'm not saying big, beautiful bill level numbers, but think of Trump 2.0 and the first thing that comes to your mind possibly is going to be tariffs.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the Trump administration has as its core the belief that tariffs are the core of the nuclear reactor of the great new golden age, and that anything can be achieved with tariffs. If you take away the tariffs, then what will happen? Well, the first thing is that bond yields will go through the roof because the budget will no longer be in any way balanced. The second thing is that all those deals, the one that is putatively being done with India, the one with Japan, the one with Europe, the one with Korea will all fall. They'd have to be renegotiated because the tariffs at the center of them would no longer be legal. And I doubt very much that those countries will sign the same sort of deal again. I mean, would Japan ever agree to put 500 billion in Trump's hands to invest in America upon their behalf while they get only 10% of the profits? I don't think so. So all of that falls down. That's absolutely enormous. So I think there's an awful lot at stake.
Well, absolutely, and it's almost as if we're going to be sitting with a crystal ball and guessing what is going to happen. But, before we do that, first things first, I wanted to get a sense of, before we move on, try and get a sense of what you think about bond yields as things are right now. And the dollar index as well, both of these things, what are you thinking of just as things stand? What happens to them hereafter is something that we'll, of course, be seeing as and when it unfolds. One of the three outcomes is something that we're penciling in, of course, like you mentioned. But for now, how are you looking at bond yields as well as the dollar?
Well, I think that's a pretty important question because we've lived through a couple of very interesting weeks in which the dollar has strengthened. Its TWI index has gone back to over 100. And bond yields have, of course, they've come down and gone up, but they're basically, if you take a 30-year bond yield, they're still kind of 50, 60 basis points below where they were when there were considerable doubts about the funding of the budget deficit. So in a sense, people have been putting more money back into the dollar. They obviously believe that the tariff news is not going to be too bad and that the effect of tariffs is not going to be too bad and the US economy is going to remain a good place to invest money. I think that what we're talking about now has a big influence upon people's perception. So that the US, if the tariff were ruled illegal, would be seen to be an economic mess with an unsustainable budget deficit and a government who couldn't do anything about it and would be flapping around trying to substitute other tariffs for the IEEPA, and it would not look good. And I think at that point in time, people will put less money into the US dollar and the dollar would start to weaken again. I would view the current strength of the dollar, the current fall in US Treasury yields, which we have seen, I would view that in any way as a temporary rally. And the reason for that is because I think ultimately the US economy will be seen to be a less attractive place for global money, and places like India and China will be working to replace the dollar as the global reserve currency, all of which works against the US having a strong dollar and a buoyant bond market. So temporary rally now. If the ruling goes against the administration, then that is the end of that rally.
All right, and that's some key commentary coming in there. That is something that you're penciling in. Let's see how that unfolds really when it comes to the Supreme Court's ruling. But tell you what, one more thing that is very important to discuss, of course, is the ongoing US government shutdown, right? Because that has become the nation's longest federal funding lapse ever. Now, it has marked its 36 days, surpassed the previous record from early 2019. And what that essentially means is that you do not have access to some key data. You do not have access to some of these estimates that could be telling you about how the economy is faring right now. So in the absence of it, given that there's a little bit of speculation there's a little bit of estimates that you're trusting that you would not be looking at if things were in normal course. But how are you looking at the US economy and the strength of the economy as things stand right now?
Well, let's say a couple of things. The first thing is the longer the shutdown goes on, the more likely that there will be spillovers into the economy which are more long lasting. If you don't get paid as a Federal Reserve employee for a longer period of time, your confidence in the future will be shaken, irrespective of whether you get paid afterwards when the shutdown is over. There is a spillover effect. So the longer it goes on, the more likely there is to be a longer lasting effect upon the economy. That's number one. Number two, I think we've got to remember that the US economy coming out of the shutdown will probably look pretty weak. The labor market will take a while to recover and normalize. And why does that matter? It matters because, the absence of data makes the Fed grow longer. And what they will say is, oops, in my December the 9th meeting, labor markets are still weak and, we've shifted our attention more towards labor markets than towards inflation. And therefore, we're going to cut rates again. I think that's the most likely effect of the end of the shutdown is weaker economic data, which the Fed takes as being worth acting upon, and you get another interest rate cut. Now, of course, you've got to say, if you take a big scoop out of economic activity by having a shutdown, when the economy is opened up again, then you get a kind of a hillock, which that scoop goes back on economic activity, but probably not completely. So the hole which the shutdown creates in the economy will be compensated for by the hillock in economic activity to compensate when the economy is opened. But I doubt that it will compensate completely.
Well, absolutely, and that's a little bit of a catch-22, if you will, right? And, in cricket terms, if you would call it something, it would be a googly, because today is a day where Prime Minister Modi, of course, is going to be meeting our women's cricket team as well, and we'll be getting our viewers visuals from that shortly as well. But now that we're talking tariffs, right, let's also talk about the other piece of the puzzle. The tariff revenue, of course, is ballooning, but that is still small compared to the overall deficit figure, right? Do you think tariffs are enough then, in your opinion, to make a significant dent, if you will, when it comes to the fiscal deficit? How are you looking at those two numbers? Because those are very big numbers, key numbers that we're looking at, right?
Oh, it's absolutely huge. And I mean, you're absolutely spot on. You're talking about tariffs bringing in, let's say, 200, 300 billion if you include revenues from investments which Japan and Korea have to make, all that sort of thing. You wrap all that up, you get 200 or 300 billion, and you're talking about a deficit of nearly 7% of GDP, really, which is about 17 trillion. So, I mean, it's nothing. You've got I said 17 trillion, I said 1.7 trillion. So, I mean, it's peanuts. But the thing is this. Trump said, I'm going to do all these things and I will cover the cost with tariffs. Now, he did all those things, which is the additional deficit he created with the big, beautiful budget, or the big, beautiful bill. That he covered the additional cost of that with the tariffs. But when you go out in time, these tariffs are nothing compared to the total US budget deficit. They're tiny, so they don't cure the problem. And number two, as you extend the tariffs in time, they will go away because the tariffs are meant to reduce US imports. If you reduce US imports, then you don't get paid the tariffs. So you are perfectly right to say this is all cosmetics. It's Schaufenster stuff, as we say in German, window dressing. It doesn't affect the fundamental issue of unsustainable budget deficits and debt burdens in the United States on behalf of the government. But what it does do is makes a cosmetic change in the short term, say 1-2 years, in which Trump can claim success. And the markets at the moment are believing him. Now, I don't believe him. You obviously don't believe him. But the effects of our disbelief will not be credible immediately unless the Supreme Court says no more tariffs.
Well, absolutely. And there's only one of three things that is going to be happening, like you've pointed out at the very beginning of this conversation. Quickly, before we let you go, I wanted to get some closing comments from you as well in terms of whether or not, and I think you've sort of insinuated or sort of hinted towards this. Are you looking at the tariffs as a little bit of a smokescreen when it comes to the rest of what is happening with the economy? And if that's not something that you concur with, do you have any other closing comments when it comes to this?
Well, I mean, I think tariffs, you've got to remember one thing, that if you are Donald Trump, and you are certainly not, then tariffs are the hammer, and every single economic, political, or international problem you meet is a nail. And as you've got a pretty simple mind, you're going to use that hammer to hit that nail. So the tariffs are going to remain front and central. We know, and you obviously know, that they do not encompass, deal with, or represent reality when it comes to the range of issues facing the US economy. But as long as the markets hang on what Donald Trump believes, then you and I will look like kind of two crows sitting on a wire going quack, quack,